Mo Shchini Acharecho Acharecho No Varutzo 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 Israel Oy Mirim LaKodesh Baruch Hu Moshcheni Acharecho Acharecho No Varutzo Israel Oy Mirim.
Hello everyone. This week we dealt with looking at the Kohanim, and we proposed that today, if indeed the Kohanim cover their hands and not just their faces, then maybe there's no problem to look at all. Today I'd like to bring a kula and then a chumrah. Let's start with the kula. There is a difference between gazing, staring, and looking. What do I mean? When you gaze at something, you're looking and you're looking very carefully, and that is prohibited. However, if you happen to look at the Kohanim today when they duchen, then I believe it's not a problem. This is what the Mogen Avraham says explicitly. The mashma lashon lihistakel mashma dafka lihistakel harbei asur aval riya be'alma lo mityasrei. In other words, you're not allowed to stare, but you're allowed to look. We can obviously understand that if the whole reason is a sechadat, you don't divert your attention if you just look for a short second. If indeed the shechina is between their fingers, maybe there would be more place to be machmir. But again, if you're not staring at it, but very quickly looking, it's not a problem. Something that's repeated by the Shulchan Aruch Harav, v'lo asur ela lihistakel aval riya be'alma muteret. This is based on a general point of view regarding all the things you're not going to look at. You're not going to look at various places in a woman's body. You're not going to look at various things. And indeed, the Yad Malachi, a very interesting Gadol b'Yisrael, his real name was Rav Malachi HaKohen. He lived in Italy in the 1700s. And he wrote a book called Klalei HaTalmud, literally the laws of how to learn Gemara. And he says, Histaklut. This is what it means when it says don't look. Every time you see that, it means more than just looking, like I'm looking at you now, but rather, it's gazing, it's staring. It's not just looking at someone quickly. Kain Katvu, he brings many poskim. The Orchot Chaim, the Abud Ram in the name of the Rosh, the Beit Yosef in the name of the Tur, and of course, our Mogen Avraham. And then he brings a famous Gemara that seems to say exactly what he's talking about. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Kaf, brings a story about Rav Shimon ben Gamliel that was going up the Har HaBayit, and he saw a woman that talks about how he said, Ma Rabu Ma'asecha Hashem, wow, what a beautiful woman. And Rabbi Akiva looked at the wife of Trantosfonus HaRasha, and the Gemara asks, who allowed them to? It says, V'nishmata mikol davar ra, and you shall guard yourself for anything evil. Shalo listakel adam b'shana'a. You're not supposed to look at such a beautiful woman. Va'afilu pnuya, even if she's not married. And therefore the Gemara says, Eren zavitu. Perush, v'layachlu lizaher, latzim enayim. Person's allowed to walk in the street. Person's not supposed to walk with a blindfold on. You're allowed to walk. If you happen to see a woman, you move on. If you gaze at her for a few minutes, that's what's prohibited. But just walking and seeing women, that is not a problem. So Rabbi Gamliel saw a beautiful woman and said what he said, because he was walking in the street. He was walking in a Keren Zavit. This is repeated by the Siach Yitzchak of Yitzchak Weiss, a student of the greater Chasam Sofer dynasty, unfortunately killed by the Nazis in 1942. He quotes the Yad Malachi. He quotes the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, and he says exactly the same thing, and this is from an Hungarian posek, and we know Hungarians usually don't feed us kulas, but he says, when it says not to look, it means stare. Aval riya mutar, you're allowed to look, like I'm looking at you now, you're not allowed to stare. I will point out that Rav Moshe Feinstein is a little more machmir on this question. Even though we have these poskim, and they base it on many other poskim, Rav Moshe Feinstein, in a famous tshuva Chelak Aleph, Simon Mem, says, when you want to look at something, then even looking briefly is prohibited. Of course, he says you're allowed to walk around the street. You don't have to walk and be what he calls a parush, namely look down the whole time. But he even goes and says, when a woman comes to ask you a shaila, if you can, try not to look at her and get joy out of it. He's more machmir than these Hungarian poskim. In any case, regarding our question, you should know it's part of a general rule in halacha. When it says not to look at something, like not to look at the rainbow, it doesn't mean look at the rainbow and then look the other way. It means gazing at the rainbow. After all, our sages made a bracha at looking at the rainbow. I don't think they wanted to trick us and say, look at the rainbow, oh, you did an aveira. Rather, gazing is prohibited, and therefore, that's what's prohibited during duchening, if at all. However, there is a chumrah, and the chumrah is what we call zecher lamikdash. The Magen Avraham is quick to point out that nohagim shelo lirot klal, don't look at all at the Kohanim. The efshar davinan zecher lamikdash, the hatam afilu riyah ba'alma hava asura mishum kvod hashchina, ve'nistakel habei b'mikdash inav kehot. In the Beis HaMikdash, since the Shechina was between their hands and they used the word Yudke Vavke in the Holy Temple, you wouldn't allow to even look. Not gaze, even look. And therefore, as a Zeichel HaMikdash, we teach everyone, don't look at the Kohanim. In other words, what my kindergarten teacher taught me was correct. Don't look at the well doing any wells, don't look at the Kohanim when they duchen, because it's a Zeichel HaMikdash. Halachically, it's not a big deal. A, they cover their hands today in many places. B, even if they don't, the Shekhinah is not between their hands because the real reason is a sechadat, diverting your attention. And C, even if it is some sort of the Shekhinah between their hands, like the Tosfot Arosh, you're not looking for a long time. But as a Zeichel HaMikdash, he says, don't look at all. And that's what the Aruch HaShulchan repeats. Ba'od, Kedei La'asot Zeichel HaMikdash, it's a good idea not to look at all. So to sum up, halachically, there's a big difference between gazing and looking. Gazing, no. Looking is probably okay. In general, in halacha, anytime it says not to look at something, from a rainbow to a woman to Kohanim. However, regarding Kohanim specifically as a Zeichel HaMikdash, where the Shechina was between their hands, we try to mimic that, and therefore not to look at the Kohanim at all when they duchen. Face them face to face, and divert your eyes down, and if you happen to look up, it's not the end of the world.
שחולק מחוכמה